Hello and welcome to the third and final part of our analysis of iCAT03. iCAT3 was the final proctored mock in this year's national level CAT test series for CAT 80. With iCAT3, we now enter the last three mocks of this season. So by now you would have finalized your attempt strategy, your strengths, weaknesses, and would have created a clear picture as to how you want to go about each section in each mock or in the actual exam. So before we go into the quant section, we observe that this mock has been classified as a moderate to tough mock by our faculty with an average difficulty level of 1.97, where each question is given an LOD or difficulty level from 1 to 3, with 1 corresponding to easy and 3 corresponding to tough. So on the whole, each question here was just below 2 or just below moderate. To give you a perspective, in the CAT, this value is somewhere between 1.9 to 1.9. As we saw in the first two parts, this mock was characterized by a tough verbal section and a tough DILR section. In contrast, the quant section was fairly simple with an average LOD of 1.56 only. Again, just to put things into perspective, in the actual CAT, this value is rated somewhere between 1.6 to 1.65. So even considering that quant is actually the simplest, this was even simpler than the exam. So that would have increased your attempts for quant in this particular mock. Now, when we go to the quant section of the actual CAT, quant is quite predictable because the overall breakup of easy, moderate and tough questions is more or less constant over the last 3 years. Now, that does not mean that it will always stay like that, but so far this has been the trend. The trend that we have observed is that there are anywhere between 15 to 17 easy questions, 3 to 5 tough questions, and the remaining questions fall in the gray area, which can be called moderate. Now, why do I call it a gray area? Simply because a question that is rated moderate by one faculty can also be rated tough by somebody else. Similarly, a question rated moderate on the other side can be rated as an easy question by somebody else. So something that is moderate is something that is not really purely easy or purely tough. That's one. The other important thing is that most faculty will agree that you need to have at least 20 plus attempts in order to clear the sectional cutoff for a standard CAT section. Quant. So here, if you solve all the easy questions and even ignore the tough questions to avoid negative marking, you would obviously need to solve some of these moderate questions in order to clear the sectional cutoff. Considering that these moderate questions would come from a variety of chapters, you would need to have a strong base in a lot of these chapters in order to increase your chances of clearing the cutoff. Generally, what students do is that they tend to become good at one or two areas, let's say arithmetic and algebra, and don't do well in, say, geometry and modern math. But what if arithmetic and algebra turn out to be tougher in your CAT slot, and geometry and modern math are on the easier side with a combination of easy and moderate questions? Then your chances of clearing the sectional cutoff go down, because while you may be able to solve the easy questions, you would struggle with the moderate ones. So that is something that you really need to take a lot of care of. Hence, we always recommend that you spread your risk and learn the basics of as many chapters as possible so that you can definitely try out as many easy questions and also do moderate questions from as many chapters as possible. Let's now go into the actual breakup of this particular mock and see how this was structured. So when I look at this particular graph, We know that quant has four very well defined areas: arithmetic, algebra, geometry, and modern math. So here firstly, we observe that the overall section LOD, as we said, was 1.56. Observe that geometry and modern math both nearly matched this particular LOD. So they were quite representative, of course with different breakup, but they were both quite representative of the overall section. Whereas in the other two areas, very clearly arithmetic was the one that brought down the difficulty level, while algebra was the one that took up the difficulty. So if I look at this overall section, algebra was the toughest part of this mock, whereas arithmetic was the simplest. Geometry and modern math were representative of the overall section in their own ways. Let's further break this up and see how these areas were devised. So firstly, we observe that arithmetic had 11 questions, which is more or less at par with what we've come to expect over the years. Algebra had 9 questions, again more or less at par with expectations. Geometry had 7 and modern math had 7. So here this paper structure was more or less what you see in CAT as well. Going further into each of these areas, observe that out of the 11 questions in arithmetic, 7 were either easy or sitters. In fact, out of these 7, 6 were sitters. What exactly are sitters? Technically, a sitter is also an easy question with the same LOD, that's 1. But it is so simple that if you just read the question, you need to possibly apply one property or one formula and arrive at the answer. Most students should be able to solve this question. Also, the time taken to solve it would possibly be less than even a minute or minute and a half. So taking into account all these factors, it is called a sitter because this is something that would definitely give you maximum returns. So in arithmetic, what we see is that more than half the questions were easy or sitters and the remaining were moderate. So there was no tough question in arithmetic. Also, we've observed generally that the moderate questions in arithmetic tend to be simpler than the moderate questions in geometry or modern math. So here again your attempts can really go up. So the overall strategy to attempt the arithmetic questions in this mock would be to maximize your attempts for the sitters and select the right questions within the moderate ones based on your understanding of the topics. On the other hand, when I look at the toughest area of the mock, very clearly out of the 9 questions here, only 1/3 were easy or sitters, whereas 5 out of 9 were moderate and 1 was tough. So even assuming that I do not attempt this question, the key word for this entire area would be to select the right questions to attempt. Because definitely you had to identify the easy ones, and within the moderate ones, you had to then try and select the ones that you were comfortable solving. When I come to geometry versus modern math, where not only is the LOD the same, the overall number of questions is the same, observe that the difference really stems from the fact that though both have the same number of sitters, that's 2, here geometry has 1 extra easy question, but fewer moderate questions and then 1 tough question. So geometry is much more diverse in that sense. So here what would have happened is that you might have ended up skipping this. But among these remaining, you should have tried to attempt as many questions here. Potentially you might not have been able to do these questions. So here again question selection would be the key factor. The same logic would apply to modern math where you should have tried to attempt as many easy questions. Within the moderate questions, depending on your comfort with the areas from which these questions were asked, you should have selected the right questions to attempt. So overall, this was the typical kind of mock where Each area required you to select the right kind of question so that you were able to clear the sectional cutoff. If I look at the overall breakup, I can see that there were 11 sitters and there were 6 easy questions. So there were 17 easy questions in all, which is more or less the same as my upper level that I have defined. There were only 2 tough questions. So this really accounts for the overall difficulty going down because the number of tough questions is less. And the number of moderate questions was 15, which is more or less at par with the minimum moderate questions that we mentioned. So what has happened here is that because there are fewer tougher questions, the overall difficulty has gone down a bit. So here, if I were to attempt even say 15 questions from this, skip the tough questions at all, and attempt even say 2/3 or 60% of the moderate questions strategically, I would have been able to attempt anywhere around 24 questions in the exam. For this, it would have been important to maximize my attempts in the easier questions and select the right questions to attempt in the moderate questions. Both of these are different strategies but very important points. Having said that there are 11 sitters, let's have a look at these sitters. So our faculty have created a list of these sitters, which is not an exhaustive list by any means. Now, one thing you might have observed in this particular mock is that, like slot 1 of CAT17, questions from one area were all arranged together. So most arithmetic questions were one after the other, most geometry questions were one after the other. This was done deliberately to give you a feel of what to expect when questions like these are not really jumbled but arranged in that kind of a sequence. So as we were saying, this list of sitters is not exhaustive. For each mock, you need to make your own list of sitters, check it with your faculty, and then compare this list with your own list and see whether you attempted the right questions. If yes, did you get the right answer or not? If you did not get the right answer, where were you making the mistakes? If you skipped the question, was it because you did not see it, or was it because you were unable to solve it due to whatever reason? This will help you analyze your mistakes much better and arrive at better conclusions to increase your marks for the next mock. Finally, we move on to the last graph of this analysis. So this shows the LOD for all questions from 67 to 100 as we've been doing all along. Here again, like always, the blue bars indicate the MCQs and the orange bars indicate the theta or numerical entry questions. So this essentially shows where the tougher questions were clustered and where the simpler questions were clustered. Now, as you can see here, if I draw an imaginary line at 83, which is nearly the halfway stage, if I draw this, you can observe that the second half of this particular section comprises a lot more tougher questions and it comprises a lot more MCQs. So if I go wrong here, my chances of negative marks really increase. So there's one tough question in both sides, and then there are 3, 5, 6, 8 moderate questions here. But all of them are MCQs. On the contrary, if you observe, again you might say that there are, instead of 8, there are 7 moderate questions here. But of these 7, 3 are numerical entry. Which means that if you go wrong, you still stand a good chance of not losing marks. When I look at the easy questions, generally we say that each mock has clusters of easy questions together. Here there were only 2 such evident clusters. One was here between 80 and 83, and then immediately after these 2 moderate questions between 86 and 88. Every other easy question was in groups of 1 or 2 smaller chunks here. So this particular mock had a huge requirement of you searching for the right questions and then attempting them. That would have really helped you clear the cutoff rather than just blindly attempting questions. Let's have a look at one or two questions and try to see the approach to solving them. So just give me a minute. Let me see which question we should have a look at. For example, if you look at question 100, this is something which is a purely theoretical question. Now, what does this mean? This is a trend that we observed in CAT since the last 3 years. In areas like functions, sets, logarithms, which are conceptual areas, we have seen that CAT has started asking very definitional questions. So for example, you will get questions on subsets, power sets, domain, range, into functions, onto functions, etc. So here, if you know the definition of onto function from domain, any domain to any range, this question does not require even 30 seconds to be solved. However, if you do not know the definition of an onto function, there is absolutely no way you will be able to solve this question. So that is a huge challenge, because you need to, even if you do not understand the concepts of certain chapters, you need to know the bare bones basics of these chapters in order to maximize your attempts. Again, the same property, look at question 97. A is the set of all prime numbers less than 100 arranged in increasing order. D is the set containing all prime numbers less than 100 arranged in descending order. So essentially A and D consist of the same numbers, all prime numbers less than 100. Which of the following numbers will occupy the same position in both the sets? Now, there are two ways to solve this question. One is to actually list down all prime numbers from 2 to, I guess, 97 below 100 in ascending order and then in descending order and match them. But if you know two important concepts here, you can solve this question very quickly. What are these concepts? Firstly, you need to know that there are exactly 25 prime numbers less than 100. This is common knowledge. And two, when I take a set and I arrange all these numbers in ascending order, especially if the set has odd number of items, like we said here, 25 prime numbers. So if the set has odd number of items, if I arrange it in either ascending or descending order, only the middle term will remain constant. Because logically think about it. The smallest number will be in position 1 in one set and it will be in position 25 in the other set, and so on. Only the middle term, that is object number 13, will remain constant in both. So to put it in mathematical terms, only the median term of both these sets will remain the same in both the sets. So here essentially the question really becomes is that if I have the set of all prime numbers less than 100, which is the median term or which is the 13th prime number. Now identifying the 13th prime number becomes very easy. So that is how this question can be solved faster using the knowledge of one or two properties. If you do not know that, of course you can remember all the prime numbers, list them down and arrive at your answer. So on the whole, if we look at this section, this was a fairly simple question section in a moderate to tough mock. If we were to summarize this mock, this was characterized by a tough verbal section with 12 good attempts, a standard tough DILR section with 16 good attempts, and an easy quant section with 24 good attempts. So on the whole, if we were to look at number of good attempts for this mock, we would say anywhere around 53 would be a good performance. This completes the analysis for iCAT03. The analysis for all our previous mocks is available on our official YouTube channel, the link for which is given here. You can subscribe to our channel by clicking this link. To get notifications every time a new video is put up, hit the bell button. Please feel free to put in your comments, feedback and questions on the thread below the video. Keep watching. Thank you and wish you all the very best.